Micron just recently shared some amazing news for AMD and NVIDIA stock investors. And in today's episode, I want to take a closer look at the following. First, we're going to start off with a quick overview on Micron's earnings. Then I want to showcase how this is very bullish for a lot of the markets that AMD, NVIDIA, and some other semiconductor companies hit. So let's take a closer look in today's episode.
I want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video, and check out fool.com/Jose for the 10 best stocks to buy now. With that link, you get a promotional offer for the subscription service. Now, let's continue with today's episode.
If you're just looking for financial numbers, this is not the place. If you want to learn how this technology is being used and how these markets are growing, make sure to hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button because you're going to get a lot of information. So first, let's just start off with a quick overview of Micron technology. So make sure to check out my free newsletter, What the Chip Happened, but we can look at a top line numbers or a top overview of everything. So record top line revenue hit $9.3 billion, up 37% year over year, and it did beat analyst expectations by about 5%. Earnings per share on a non-GAAP basis was $1.91, which also beat expectations by about 19%. The other thing is guidance was pretty strong at $10.7 billion, plus or minus $0.3 billion, with gross margins of 42%, plus or minus 1%. Overall, everything beat expectations. Revenue beat expectations, earnings per share beat expectations, and guidance beat expectations. Now, unfortunately, you might be wondering, Jose, why is the stock down even though after those strong earnings? In my opinion, I mean, anything can be the case, but in my opinion, the stock has run up about 30% in the past month or so, even after this drop. And to me, it might have been priced to almost perfection or to perfection, and the company gave almost perfection. It was just about 1% short of it. So regardless, I'm not an investor of Micron, but long term, things look pretty strong for Micron technology. Now, I want to kind of pull up some charts before I kind of talk about AMD and NVIDIA in a bit. But these charts are found by our partner at fiscal.ai. Make sure to check out fiscal.ai/Jose for 15% off and 2 weeks free. So the first thing I wanted to kind of talk about is just showcasing this company's balance sheet. So here we can see in kind of like the dark blue, we have about its total cash and short-term investments. And on a quarterly basis, it is improving right now, sitting about at $10.8 billion. Now, long-term debt is also increasing. Unfortunately, right now it's sitting at about $15 billion as this company is trying to build out more and more facilities as this demand for memory continues. The other and final thing I want to look at is free cash flow, and this is on the trailing 12 months. Things are improving and now sitting at $1.9 billion. And as we can see just from free cash flow itself, this is a very cyclical business. And that's the kind of scary part about the memory market. I talked about it in the past. The memory market right now is becoming a little bit less commoditized because of things like high bandwidth memory, which is a special type of memory that goes into AI chips. It is kind of losing that commodity as long as it keeps innovating. And HBM is also helping a lot with kind of the supply and demand balance, seesaw balance, because for those that are not familiar, HBM has this kind of trade-off ratio of DRAM where it helps actually control that supply and the balance of demand. So that is helping right now eliminate a lot of the commodity of the memory industry. Is that always going to be the case? I don't know. As long as the company continues to innovate and as long as the need for innovation in the memory space is still needed, the answer is yes. But if we ever see a slowdown in innovation by Micron, if we ever see a slowdown in innovation needs by the overall market, it can kind of bring the commodity back to this industry. And that's very important to know for a risk for Micron. Now, one thing that I think is an early indication of maybe the memory becoming a little bit more commodity is starting to see a weakness in margins. And right now, we haven't really seen a weakness, but we are kind of seeing a bit of a stale or stalemate at least for now, we do see for guidance, if we remember guidance was about 42% gross margins for this upcoming quarter. And that would be a nice sequential and even a year-over-year growth. So right now we are still seeing, I mean, this is the perfect example. Gross margin starts to decline, hit negative numbers, and then we start to see this pull up as the market turns around, right? And for the memory market and for certain cyclical business, you don't want to be there during this time right here. This is the time when stock prices are dropping dramatically. It's actually pretty funny, but this, when you're kind of at your worst, and maybe between here, is when you start to see a growth in stock price as the bottom has already, or the worst has been kind of already priced in, and you start to see some massive returns in the memory business. So like I mentioned, this is why for the memory market, I'm not a huge fan of just looking at things like forward PE valuations. I think keeping a closer eye on operating margins, on gross margins, give you a better indication of where we are in the industry. And now, based on guidance, we can see that we're still kind of tickering up. The other thing is, because of the current AI industry, it's very hard to determine if this is a market that will just stay consistent for a long time, or are we going to go back to the cyclicality? And again, like I mentioned, it's all about innovation. That's the crazy and the cool part about investing in AI technologies, is that, especially right now, we don't know where this AI space is going to take us, and that can either be a risk and can also be a massive reward if we are very bullish in our companies. So just want to share my overall thoughts on Micron overall as earnings, as an overall top view of earnings. Now I want to kind of jump into why I believe this is actually very bullish for companies like AMD and NVIDIA. And the first thing I want to do for AMD is kind of just look at their revenue segments so we can understand which segments are crucial for AMD. So in in trailing 12 months, we can see the company did about $14 billion in data center, about $10.3 billion in total client and gaming. This is kind of consumer electronics, and about 3.5 billion in the embedded market. So about 10%, a little bit more, maybe closer to 12-13% comes from this segment. About more than 50% comes from the data center, and then about 35 comes from like the consumer goods. So to me, all these markets are double digits percentage. Some are low teens, some are close to 50, and some are somewhere in between. Any of these markets seeing a growth opportunity can actually be pretty strong for the top line number. So remember that. Next, I want to kind of look at NVIDIA. So NVIDIA is a whole different beast right here. If we're kind of looking at quarterly numbers, I don't know why I wasn't looking at trailing 12 months, but here on quarterly numbers, we can see that out of the 44 billion it did in the last quarter, 39 comes from the data center market. 3.8 billion comes from the gaming market. So about 90% of the total revenue, a little bit over 90% of total revenue, comes from the data center market. About less than 10 comes from the gaming. Everything else, professional and automotive, in my opinion, don't really move anything for NVIDIA in forms of top line or even bottom line. Obviously, data center is the biggest mover. And I want to say gaming, even though it's only 3.8 billion, it's close to 10%. So if gaming and the consumer space ever see a nice beat, it could potentially be the reason NVIDIA in future earnings beats expectations, right? So I don't want to throw out the gaming revenue just yet. So remember these two, how both AMD and NVIDIA are broken down. So I have this pretty cool presentation of some of the slides and kind of discussing how it affects AMD and NVIDIA. So first, I want to take a closer look at the PC market. So Micron, because it's a product that is used in every type of electronic out there, you get to understand how each market is doing. So the PC space, they expect PC market units to grow in low single-digit percentage range in calendar year of 2025. And in the future, they expect that a key catalyst for growth include the increasing adoption of AI-enabled PCs and Windows 11 upgrade cycle. So first, the PC is very consumer dependent. I think this is very strongly impressive or bullish for AMD. The reason being is AMD in the total client side it was about 35, 36% of total revenue. If we are seeing growth here, it means AMD is going to expect growth in this segment. The second thing is you might be saying, Jose, it's only low single digit percentage. That is true. That is low single digit percentage if you're growing at the market rate. But AMD right now, it is taking market share in this industry, both for the desktop and the laptop market. It's becoming a high, the average selling price is also increasing dramatically. So for AMD, even though the market might be growing at low single digits, AMD is growing a lot faster. And I do believe we can see some better numbers here for the total client and gaming side in the upcoming quarter. So I think that was a nice bullish indication. Obviously, for NVIDIA, similar. I don't think it's going to be massive as, again, it's not that big portion, but it can definitely benefit there. Now, here they kind of talk about in the quarters ahead, key catalysts for growth include decreasing adoption of AI-enabled PCs and the Windows 11 upgrade cycles. They also expect smartphone units to grow low single digits in calendar of 2025. Now, I'm actually not too excited about this. If I was kind of a shareholder of Apple or Qualcomm, it seems like this phone industry is not adapting as quickly as many might be expecting. So it's not a warning. Obviously, the market could be expecting, but at least I don't follow those industries, but Micron is just giving us another data point of how slow maybe the smartphone business is right now. Now, I want to jump into the data center market. And as we saw for both AMD and NVIDIA, data center is very, very crucial. So in data center, they expect the calendar year server market to grow mid-single digits, largely driven by significant growth in AI servers. They mentioned that DRAM, they see strong growth and share gains in HBM. They talk about how they expect to continue to grow their HBM share, how HBM is being used by companies like AMD and NVIDIA. Here we can see that in fiscal 3, some of their data center solutions, like their solid state drives, are part of the recommended list for the GB200 and VL72. So right now, Micron Technologies is continuing to give us the green light that the data center market is growing as quickly as it can. So regardless, that to me is a bullish indications for any company that is seeing this data center market growth. So obviously, very bullish for AMD, but in my opinion, data center growth for NVIDIA is the crucial thing. So if we're seeing strong adoption in AI servers and NVIDIA are pretty much synonyms. Yep, synonyms in this kind of topic. So overall, those to me are the biggest bullish takes for AMD and NVIDIA. And again, it might not seem like a big deal, but these are the data points that allow us to understand how we should be expecting the upcoming earnings. And if we see something different, if for some reason, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but the way you think about this is for some reason we go into AMD's earnings, and AMD's earnings are actually flat or declining in the client space. That to me tells me that Micron was already telling us that there was some growth here. What's happening with AMD? Is it other competitors eating the market share? And if it's actually growing faster, it's like, look, AMD is eating market share in this space. So that's how we use this information to understand and kind of correlate and baseline what is happening in the semiconductor industry. And let me just ask again, why have you not hit that subscribe button just yet? As this is going to be the best place you're going to find any semiconductor news. Now, here, I just want to share some more thoughts from kind of Micron. They mentioned data center revenue more than doubled year over year and reached a record level, and consumer-oriented markets had strong sequential growth. They also mentioned in fiscal quarter 3, DRAM revenue reached a new record, driven by nearly 50% sequential growth in HBM revenue. Looking ahead to fiscal quarter 4, we see a robust demand environment and expect to grow revenue by 15% sequentially to a record $10.7 billion at guidance midpoint. Some other great indications is customer inventory levels have been healthy overall across end markets, and there may have been some tariff-related pull-ins by certain customers. But The most important there is customer inventory levels have been healthy. And the reason I talk about this is because then they go on that the automotive market is kind of seeing some form of growth. In industrial, they are seeing a resumption in growth as customers increase their investments for the adoption of AI, including in key areas like factory automation. The reason I want to talk about this one is because if we look at the embedded market is still over 10% of AMD's total revenue. So this is another industry. Right now for AMD, it seems like we got massive green lights for the data center markets. We have some green lights for the client and gaming market, and we're getting maybe not a complete green light, but we're no longer in the red light here for the embedded space. We're seeing some hope that this market is actually expected to pick up. So you're going to have eventually in a quarter or two from now, you're going to have massive green lights on all these three industries. And that's what Micron is telling you for AMD and NVIDIA investors. Again, for the embedded market, it could be strongest. It could show an indication that maybe the data center space might be seeing more demand from those industries as they might be adopting more AI training and inferencing. But on a real approach, I do think is very bullish for the embedded market for AMD. All right, so that's all the information I have here for Micron Technology investors, for AMD investors, and for NVIDIA investors. Like always, if you do appreciate the channel, make sure to check out What the Chip Happened. If you do like the charts and like 15% off, make sure to check out fiscal.ai/Jose. And one more time, thumbs up and hit the subscribe. Peace out.